That's what we make fun of.
What is the relationship between their characters and their society?
So the characters are split into two main groups, which are the police officers and the natives. And the relationship between the society and them is that the natives live in a native society. They're ruled over by the British, and they have a social structure which is not the same as them, so they don't treat each other the same. And the British people are more civilized, and that's why they conquered them. So that's what I think the influence is.
And then from there, split even more, we have the men and the women, where the men treat the women horribly and they kind of just don't care about it. And in the text, it talks about how they spit on their women. So they have no respect for them, so women have it worse even more than the officers do.
Does the story address societal issues such as race, gender, and class?
I think it discusses class because you see how people get treated depending on what your authority is and like what your social class is. So it's not so much about how much money you have necessarily, but how much power you have. And the more power you have, the better you're treated.
With what they said about the children, we discussed that. Yeah, I think that's kind of a loose connection with that. It's kind of like a hierarchy of power.
How do social forces shape the power relationship between groups and classes of people in the story? Who has the power and who doesn't, and why?
Honestly, I believe that that the natives have the power, not by themselves or individually, but collectively they reign over authority because, well, it depends on the type of authority. I think that the natives reign power over, they have the most power because, or not individually, but collectively, because depending on the person in authority, if their opinion on how they're looked on or like how people view them is still relevant or matters to them or influences them, then the natives have more control because they can dictate how the person in authority feels, which will dictate what they do, which is really like this indirect power if you think about it.
It really is indirect versus direct because the officers have the actual power, like the power to enforce laws, but as for like mental power or like manipulative power or influential power, the natives have that.
You know, one of the odd things I think about is how the officers don't try to do anything to obtain more power. Like, you know, obviously they must try slightly, but they don't enforce anything. Like, we have examples like, you know, when Hitler took over Germany and then Mussolini took over Italy. You know, I mean, it was one guy and he formed an army and like with brute force took over these people, but the British have like, technically they have the control over them, like through paper, but in reality it's the natives that still control them. So I find it odd how they haven't forced the natives to follow them, or they haven't used force so that they can make their statement clear that they are in power.
I think that's like because it's like when you get a new principal at a new school, like this guy, obviously we see that he still cares about the opinion of other people, and he hasn't been like maybe other officers, because we weren't really exposed to the in-depth feelings of other officers. But with just this one, maybe his feelings haven't been transformed into like this. He hasn't built a wall yet between himself and the natives. So the natives' opinion probably still gets to him. Like I was about to say, a new principal at a new school. You don't find new principals like right when they get there being really mean and like trying to make all these new rules and enforce all these new things because they're trying to get in with the students.
So what you're saying is basically the reason they haven't taken over power is because they still have a conscience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that's kind of how it works here, is the battle of that conscience being lost to like the popular thing they wanted him to do.
It's a battle between wanting to please the people and also doing your job.
Yeah.
How does the story reflect the British conquest or the American dream?
So the British conquest, which is something we researched beforehand, where the British conquered Burma and now they're in control. I think it's what we just talked about with the reflection of the trade-off of power and the battles they went through in their minds and in their actions. That's how it reflects, kind of like, even though the British conquered Burma, the Burmese have conquered them in other ways by using this pressure.
even though they changed it to the British conquest, it still can relate technically to the American dream because
Yeah.
part of the American dream is being able to be free.
Yeah.
But like, if you go to America, you know the way the government works and how there's people in power and then those that follow. But I guess the officer wants that. The officer wants not complete control over the natives, but he wants to have authority that he should have. But I guess he can't reach it yet because of what you said about him having a conscience about everything. And I know that this one officer isn't the one who's supposed to be like on top,
Yeah.
but I guess he's still trying to achieve the American dream in a sense. But
Like
also
the essentials of it.
yeah. But I guess he just can't get there yet because of, you know, like you said, the consciousness and everything and how he can't really be mean. He wants to be liked. And I guess that's what makes him lose his power is because he wants to be liked, not because what needs to be done needs to be done.
And it's kind of a strange concept here, being that the next best familiar concept of conquering we have is when the English people and the Puritans came over with the Native Americans. We conquered them eventually, and that was force. We tried to get them to like us at first, but that ended up just force. So it's interesting to see kind of like an earlier or later or kind of the same time version of that with them going to this place. They conquered it. The story takes place in conquered Burma. Like, it's not like happening, it already happened. They have the power, essentially, but they're not using it in a way that is powerful.
Or effective. It depends on like what your definition of effective when it comes to power is, because like some people I'm sure look at power as like, okay, you have complete control. I can threaten to take this away from you. You know, I can put fear in you. Fear and power kind of go hand in
And that's what we
hand.
defined in class, the word power. It's
Yeah.
the ability to make someone do something you want them to do.
Right.
So that's, I guess by that definition, the natives have power over him, or
Yeah.
that other question, because they made him do what they wanted him to do,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
I mean, fear is used everywhere for power. Think of it. It's like as simple as your mom telling you, if you don't clean your room, I'll take your phone.
And we're
Yeah.
scared of getting in trouble.
That's what I said.
Exactly.
Fear and power go hand in hand.
Yeah, so it's used in like everyday life, and the fact that they kind of don't want to do that. They still want to like be all
Fair.
buddy with everybody, but I think this is when like a trial error thing they did where they realized, you know, being friends with everybody doesn't mean you're gonna get power. It just means that they're gonna eventually take advantage of you. I'm not saying that if you're
They're going
friends
to have a lot of influence because you
Yeah.
care about what they think.
Exactly. So then it's just kind of, if you want to be in power, that's not really going to work out. It's just going to be your opinion plus their opinion plus what they think plus what you think they think. So it's
Yeah.
all a mountain, and you're not going to ever end up with power if you end up caring about what they think.
And fear, you can't, I'm just thinking about it, you can't really have power without fear. And fear's not always a negative thing. It could be, you know, reinforcement rather than, you know, something that's like, oh, a threat or anything.
Like when Schweiker
But-
talked about the fear of God.
Yeah, but like if you have a respectful fear, if you don't have that respectful fear, there's no consequence, there's no anything to risk. Then like this, the natives feel like they have the power, and they know they do. Honestly,
Yeah, I kind of get what you mean. I guess an example of that would be when your mom tells you don't put your hand on the stove.
yeah,
Because it's like not a thing that she'll do to you to harm you. That's like
Thing you do to
purposeful.
yourself.
Yeah, it's like something
Yeah.
that just will happen and you don't want it to. So I guess yeah, there is different types of usage of fear, but most people when they try to take over a place, they use like the bad fear, the fear that
Yeah,
will
yeah,
like
yeah.
get you.
Fear mongering.
and I feel
Yeah.
like that's this officer's issue is that he didn't feel comfortable using that type of fear, and he didn't want to have to come down to that resort. I guess.
Does the story reflect urban, rural, or suburban values?
I think it reflects rural because we're in a society that is in the setting of the story kind of rural with the fields that we talked about, with the elephant eating the grass, and that set kind of like an open. You usually think of rural areas as really open, right? And not too much around, which is what I pictured here. Like the village is probably where the places they were. There's probably some buildings, probably a lot of land, a lot of agricultural stuff. They said the ground was like wet mud at the time, so I figured that would make up most of the landscape as opposed to like cut grass and stuff like that. So I pictured it kind of like rural and not dirty, but like dusty, just like that kind of thing. And I think it reflects those values because it talks about the openness of decision and the actual choices, the ways to go. And in a rural area, there's usually a lot of like back roads and stuff like that. So I'm taking it kind of figuratively, kind of literal, with the setting that was presented.
There is a part around the end of the book. He says after he shot it that he was kind of grateful that that one native did die. And then you kind of look at it odd because normally, like in normal, stories when people talk about them, it's usually the people that are in power when they die. That's when everything. To like use an example, like guess in America when they were like slaves and stuff, if a white man died, that was like dramatic. That was like, oh, you can go kill everybody for that. But the minute an African American died, it was like, who cares? So I guess what I'm saying is like, even though these officers are in power, I guess it wouldn't matter if one of them died because as everyone didn't care if he went to go face this elephant by himself. But because this one native died, oh, go shoot the elephant.
And that's
Yeah.
what shows you. That shows you who's really in power.
Yeah.
That was really highlighted in there too. I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of odd because you don't see that as often, and I guess that's like a highlight to show that they really are not anywhere near.
I think that was one of the most reflective moments of the comparison.
Yeah, and it definitely highlights their values.
What does the work say about economic or social powers? Who has it and who does it? Any merits learning of it?
So we talked about political and influential power, but as for economic and social, the social power I think goes to the majority of people most of the time. So I don't think they're, like I said when we were talking about this before, that the natives, there are more of them than the officers most likely, almost certainly. So in a society, usually majority rules with social power, and power being the ability to influence in that case. As for economic, that's a little harder to answer, but I think it plays into how their society works with the stuff they do for trade and stuff. Yeah.
It's obvious that the natives are above the officers, and I guess the elephant itself represents the officers, and how even though it is this big, powerful animal, I guess that the way the animal kind of was calmed down and did not care about its surroundings kind of showed about the officers and how they did not care for total power, because this elephant can have a lot of power, and it does.
And it showed that.
And because it didn't use it,
Well, it did use it at first, and then it
yeah,
stopped using
exactly. So the same way these officers used their force at first to conquer, but then they decided not to do it, like not to use that much
it.
force.
And it ended up to be their evident
Yeah.
almost demise.
So then when that one officer was shooting at it, it kind of was like them shooting on themselves. So even though this elephant has like a great amount of power, all of these people watching them, all of them being the natives, kind of like showing them that together they make one strong force, whereas just one, even though it is just one, they do still make, like, they're still strong. And it's odd because even though this elephant could take them all down, they still somehow ended up with more social influence than the officer did. So that's the odd part about it.
Does the story address issues of economic exploitation, and what role does money play?
So, talking about the elephant again, I think that was an example of economic exploitation because there was a chance that it wouldn't die, depending on the decision of Orwell in that situation. So, they kind of, and I'm pretty sure they did this anyway because I think it talked about them doing it before. They took it as soon as it died and turned it into food. So that's kind of like exploiting something that they would think of, because it talked about the value of the elephant, right? If it was alive, it was worth 300 pounds, I think, and dead, just 5 for its tusks. And they took all the meat off of it too, I would assume, so it's worth that to them. But I think the terms of value varies between the natives and the officers because they were talking about pounds, which is money there, and then the natives just were concerned with the meat of it. So I think that's kind of an example of exploitation in a certain way.
I don't think anything money-wise was too important to them. Because honestly, if you think about it, they could have easily gotten the meat and then sold it, but they decided to eat it, which kind of just shows that like money is not worth as much as.
Well, it shows the condition of their society.
Yeah.
Maybe
It
kind
shows
of what
that,
the
like-
British are ruling them like.
It shows that like their main concerns are always like those. What is that thing called? The little triangle. It's like the
Pyramid?
no. It's like I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's like the triangle that we learned like freshman year, and it's by this man. But basically, he says that food and safety and like shelter.
I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah.
With like the essentials of life,
Uh-huh.
most important versus
Yeah.
least important.
Are like our main needs, and so I feel like they worry more so on the first thing, which was like to make sure, basically making sure they survive, and
Yeah.
that's what I feel like the main subject or idea about this story is survival, because the authorities, the officers in authority, they are trying to survive by just doing their job, and they know they can't really piss the natives off that much because collectively they're stronger than them. And then also it's the natives trying to survive more physically rather than mentally. And then it's also the elephant trying to survive too, if you really think about it. So everyone's just,
It's like a trade-off of life.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Going off what you just said, and then going back to the question about values, it kind of just shows that the natives have kept their values, and even though money has been introduced to them and like different products have been introduced to them, they still don't care. They value their own little
Well, they don't care a
survival
little bit.
tricks and everything. Yeah, like it's still there, and I won't
Yeah.
say that nobody
Because
like,
they have
cares about it.
infrastructure, it's just not like,
Yeah, but they I mean, do you see what I mean? Like
it's not
if
as
you-
much as a concern to them.
way I can put it is, if you saw an elephant die, would you
Yeah.
run up to it and go, "Oh, let me grab the meat"?
Not really.
So what I'm saying is that they still care about that.
Yeah.